So welcome everyone. I'm just delighted to host you all for this exciting topic. My name is Matt Jones, and I am the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation Alumni Network President. And we're delighted to see you all tonight on a Friday, no less, at 6 o'clock p.m. But during these times, where else are you going to be? So we're delighted to have you here as well. This will be a great conversation. We have 3 distinguished alumni from our school, which is really great. But before we get started with our some housekeeping items, I just wanted to acknowledge that we also have with us tonight Assistant Professor Linda May, as well as Associate Dean Brian Kelly. They've registered. I don't know if they've arrived yet, but they will be joining us. So we're excited to have some faculty from the school here this evening. Some housekeeping items is that it will be recorded. So if you do not want to have your shining face recorded for posterity, you should turn off your camera. This recording will be made available next week. So if you have folks, friends, colleagues who would like to see this, who can't join us in real time, they can watch it whenever they'd like at their leisure. This event will last about 90 minutes. I'm assuming we'll have some really great conversation. I only have 5 questions for the panelists this evening. Then afterwards, we'll open the floor up to anyone that has questions for them. And I believe those are all the housekeeping items. And so I will introduce them all right now. So first, we have Oluseyi Olugbinli, who is with the Office of Planning and Capital Programming at MDOT Maryland Transit Administration. Oluseyi is a transit executive leader supporting the director in the oversight of the project development, capital programming, and environmental planning divisions within the MDOT Maryland Transit Administration. Before joining MTA, Oluseyi served as a transportation planning consultant and spearheaded the analysis and planning of MDOT State Highway Administration's first ever business-focused asset management plan, analyzing critical assets, including bridges, pavements, facilities, vehicles, and IT management systems. Oluseyi's expertise extends to transportation planning, policy, and legislation. She's an advocate for public transportation, equitable planning, and civic engagement. Oluseyi is a proven leader in her church community, amen, through youth mentorship and premarital counseling. In her leisure time, she's a self-proclaimed political fanatic who loves to read and spend time with her family. She resides in Howard County with her husband and 2 young children. Welcome, Oluseyi. Next, we have Jessica Jones, no relation, I think. She is a senior real estate development manager at Enterprise Community Development, ECD. At ECD, she manages several multi-million-dollar low-income housing tax credit developments throughout Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Additionally, she managed a solar installation project designed to affix 1 megawatt of solar panels across 12 properties within the ECD portfolio. This project is recognized as one of the largest multifamily affordable housing solar panel installations in Washington, D.C. Prior to her tenure at ECD, Jessica worked to advance environmentally friendly development at Sustainable Design Consulting. At SDC, she assisted in managing and coordinating lead technical assistance and process management services on over 35 projects throughout the DC metro area. Ms. Jones holds a master's in real estate development from the University of Maryland College Park, as well as a bachelor's of science in architecture and environmental design from Morgan State University, earning her LEED AP certification in 2008. Jessica has focused her career towards the built environment with an emphasis on affordable green housing and sustainable design. Welcome, Jessica. And last but not least, we have Mckay Akinsade, who is the founder, design director of the architecture firm Atelier Mide, a multidisciplinary design firm based in Baltimore, Maryland, and Lagos, Nigeria. A registered architect in the state of Maryland, Mckay is an alumnus of the University of Maryland College Park, where he attained his Bachelor of Science, Master of Architecture, and Certificate in Urban Design degrees. As a seasoned senior project design leader, Mckay has designed multiple national and international award-winning projects across Baltimore City, the state of Maryland, as well as across the globe. His tenure and experience span multiple international design firms, notably RTKL, Smith Group, HOK, and Gensler. He currently teaches design studio at the University of Maryland and has been a frequent architecture studio juror at many local universities. In addition, he currently serves on the board of directors of the American Institute of Architects, AIA, DC chapter. Notable projects designed by Mckay include 750 Pratt Street Tower, Morgan State University Martin D. Jenkins Hall, the University of Maryland Baltimore Health Sciences Research Facility, 3, National Cancer Institute, Washington Union Station Train Shed, wow, Cap Sark Mosque and Community Master Plan, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Heart of Doha Land, Qatar, Dalian Tower, China. So without further, these are our panelists, so welcome them. And we'll get started with our first question, and I'll throw it to anyone that wants to take the first bite at it. And the first question is, how has your experience at the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation impacted your career trajectory?
I could take that one. How has my experience? Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you to the University of Maryland College Park for inviting me back, right, to talk to my fellow Terps and friends of Terps. I feel like when you get invited back, you're officially old. So maybe you were kind of getting into the old crew. But my experience at College Park actually extends, beyond just grad school. I did my undergrad. I started off in architecture and decided to, within a year of studio, I remember it like it was yesterday. The late Professor Emeritus Carl Dupuy sat me down and was like, maybe architecture isn't your thing. And I was like, yeah, it's not my thing. I don't think I like architecture, and I don't think architecture likes me anymore. And we just had, and he looked at my transcript and he saw all of the classes that I had taken. He was like, it looks like you've done a lot of, historic classes, African-American studies. Maybe planning is your thing. And I remember in my last semester, actually, the late Professor Sidney Brower, he was my advisor, and I decided to study the East Baltimore Development Corporation. And that to me was like the biggest eye opener and opening to like my calling and what I was meant to do. The EBDI, or East Baltimore Development Corporation, was all about a redevelopment project that sparked a lot of intense resentment in the community. There were about 700 families that were displaced. It was supposed to be like this private public partnership of an 88-acre property that was supposed to like pay neighbors, kind of pay neighbors off, and then promises that they would come back. And so I remember doing that study and just realizing the increased number of disinvestment in our area. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and was very much aware of my surroundings, but I feel like that project and the understandings of Baltimore was an eye opener for me. So I, did that, and then went to do Teach for America, which really was another eye opener of looking at all of the inequities in education, and decided to pursue my graduate degree. So I came back to the University of Maryland College Park. So a lot of memorable moments, but one other thing that I'll touch on, and then I'll stop talking, is the individual studies course that I took with Dr. Willow Lung Amam. I remember we studied the Littonsville area in Montgomery County, and this is around the time that the Purple Line, was coming in. And so I did this study, and only to find out that it was a predominantly African-American community, right? It was the county, or the city actually, is named after a free slave. And, it was just shocking to me that in the 1960s and the 1970s, this area still didn't have like paved roads and and running water. And so I got to meet like I would call her the matriarch, Charlotte. I'll never forget her. I wonder if she's still there. But yeah, she did a lot through restorative justice and civic engagement. And so anyway, my experiences at College Park were great in that I was able to come into who I am today. But at the same time, it was an eye opener because I was the only Black woman doing studio at the time. And, there were some struggles there that I know we'll get into later, but I am grateful for the professors that, had those tough conversations with me and brought me to what I am supposed to do, which is planning.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll go next. So I did not, as my bio said, I did not go to undergrad in Maryland, but I did my master's degree at Maryland. And I was coming from HBCU. I actually saw a fellow Morgan alum log in. That's kind of exciting. So, but I was coming from an HBCU. And to come into Maryland, the development program was pretty new at the time. I think I might have been the second class. Yeah, hi, Classy. I might have been new. It was new at the time. And there might have been, it was small compared to Maryland. Maryland is a huge school and Morgan State was not that big. So it was already a little nerve-wracking coming from a small HBCU to such a large PWI institution at like Maryland. And oh gosh, the class might have only had 30 students in it, but out of the 30 students, there might have been 4 or 5 Black people. And out of those 4 or 5 Black people, there were probably 2 women, and I was one of them. It was, just like development, it's a good old boys club. That's usually older white men. And the program itself really a lot of the attendees were white, but I'm back now. I forgot to put in my bio, I'm actually a mentor for the development program at UMD. So I do mentor the master's candidates that are getting their development degree. So to be able to come back and be a Black woman as a mentor is really a full circle, because I think when I was there, I graduated in 2009, there were no Black professors. So definitely an eye opener, but it was a great school. The degree that I got allowed me to have the job that I have now. And I learned a whole lot from Maryland. So, yeah.
Nice. I guess I'll go next. I think unlike other 2 panelists, I kind of have a more, I don't know if that's the right word, a traditional sort of route through architecture and academia at the University of Maryland at College Park. As my bio was reading earlier, I did get my undergraduate degree from College Park a long time ago. I don't want to age myself in case some of my students are on the panel. But a little bit of a backstory, which hopefully we can touch on later, as Oluseyi was mentioning. I was actually born in Washington, D.C., and my parents were students here in the 70s, and they kind of took me and my brother back to West Africa when we were toddlers. I think I was 4. And so I spent my formative years growing up in Nigeria and West Africa, and then came back to the D.C. area in the late 80s, early 90s. And living in DC, I had my eyes on 2 paths. I was either going to go to Howard or go to UDC. And I actually took some classes at UDC way early, before they had a bona fide architecture program. But I saw with the credits that I had, and my parents were sort of moving into Montgomery County, that the University of Maryland was an opportunity to, sort of get a well-rounded education. Not that I couldn't at the HBCU like Howard, but it was sort of like where the trajectory was headed. So I took some earlier classes and then got into the architecture program for a bachelor's degree. And as Jessica was saying, and as Shay was saying, yes, when I came in, I was one of 3 African-American or African students in the class. We lost, actually one of 4. We lost 2 students that decided to go into other majors, and this other gentleman I graduated with, Eric Thompson, and we're sort of like the only 2 sort of people of color, if you would, in the class. And then after that, I sort of took some time off, joined a firm in Baltimore, RTKL, and actually worked there for quite a number of years, like a decade almost, before I decided to go back and get my master's. And people thought at the company that I was working for, first of all, why would you need to get a master's? You've invested 10 years in the company, you're doing well, you've been promoted, you're doing excellent projects. Why would you want to go back? But I remember the foundation that I had in undergrad, as Shayi was talking about, with the numerous professors that you engaged, and sort of like the lessons that they imparted on me. I thought it was necessary to go do a thesis project. A thesis project that is in alignment with how I see myself continuing down the line as a professional. So I wanted to focus, basically use my academic studies as a research opportunity to look at waterfront development. I was living in Baltimore, so it made sense. So I went back in 2002. Joined the program again, got to meet the professors again. It was great seeing all the same faces. And after finishing there, then I continued to work at subsequent firms like Smith Group in DC, HOK, which actually I had my longest tenure and did most of the exciting projects that are in my portfolio and experience at HOK. Then did a short stint at Gensler and decided to start my own atelier. Part of the question you were asking earlier, Matt, was about how this sort of prepared us for the profession.
Right.
And I think outside of the fact that I was one of 2 people that finished in undergrad, and in grad school, I think I was the only person of color in my class. That was something that registered then, because you're always looking for familiarity, amongst your colleagues, amongst professors that you can sort of share your point of view with. But I think the program at Maryland is well formulated to sort of build in the foundation of what it means to be an architect. So it was interesting when I was going to go back to grad school, some of my colleagues and my bosses at work were like, oh, my alma mater is Rice in Houston or UPenn, you should consider those. And I look at all the students that were coming out of there and looking at the legacy of work. And I thought there were some aspects of it on a fundamental level in terms of making architecture and making great spaces where that benefits community was missing from those programs. So I decided, and also for the fact that I could pay in-state tuition, I decided to stay at College Park. So it did prepare me very well to, even though now that we're sort of arguing across the country, what the curriculum should look like, should it be more inclusive? I think even what it was when I was studying, it prepared me to sort of engage the world as a global citizen. And also given the fact that I've lived all over the globe, I actually actively made sure I did the study abroad programs to sort of broaden my perspective. And I think the university creates those foundations to sort of enable its students to be active global citizens, as placemakers. So I was very appreciative. That's why I returned to sort of teach. I've been back like 4 times now to teach design studio. So it's a well that I keep reaching back into.
Great, thank you for those answers. My next question is, how's your experience being African-American, being a Black person, impacted your work in the built environment or the community development space?
Shay, go for it.
It's so funny. I was like, that's a good one. Let me think about it. I don't want to be the first one to speak again. Okay, you're gonna have to repeat some parts of your question. I want to make sure I answer
Sure,
everything.
I'll repeat it again. Okay,
Yeah.
ready?
Yep.
How has your experience being Black impacted your work in the built environment or the community development space?
Yeah. Okay. So a little bit about my upbringing, which will bring me to like the profession, right? So I am Black, right? And I think my parents immigrated from Nigeria in 1978. I am one of 5 daughters. So the 7 of us, we grew up in Southeast Washington, D.C., very near to Berry Farms. So anyone from Southeast, Berry Farms is predominantly Black area, underserved population. So very early on, I witnessed, the struggles of the Black community. It was almost as if even though we didn't have the African-American history, we were from Nigeria, right? But we inherited all of the issues by living in Washington, D.C., right? So witnessing the poor housing options that my parents were provided, the lack of infrastructure, sometimes the water wasn't running, we had issues with pests in our house. The schools that we went to weren't the best, if not for my parents who, would make up projects for us to do. We rode the bus, depended on transit. We went to Bernie Elementary School. I'll never forget, it was the 5 of us, or the 4 of us at the time. My younger sister wasn't born yet. And we were, getting on the bus by ourselves. We eventually moved to Prince George's County, and through the magnet program was bused from Lanham to Laurel High School. And then, of course, eventually getting to the University of Maryland. So when I think about all of those experiences, I think about my parents' experiences, the struggle of immigrants in a new country, learning a lot. They came here on a school scholarship, both of them. My dad went to Howard University, and my mom, University of District of Columbia. And I carry all of that. And then I also carry the weight of the history that existed by being Black in America. And so thinking about my profession, when I left the University of Maryland and graduated at the grad school program, we all just wanted to get a job. And so the first job that I got was transportation planning at WSP. But it was in that process that I understood, wow, transportation is not just transportation. It reminded me to go back to my experiences when I was 5 years old, getting on the bus and seeing predominantly, mothers, Black women riding the bus who were, transit dependent, and then connecting those experiences with what I do now, which is transit, right? Like providing opportunity, connecting people to opportunity through transportation. It would be incredibly wrong of me to forget all of that history, right? All of those experiences. And then, I'm reminded that, guess what? There is a inherent connection to the built environment and race, right? It's not something that happened by mistake, right? When I in my studio days, I remember you could just click a building if you wanted, delete whatever you want. We can't do that in real life. We can't delete a building. We can't delete a highway. We have to face like the historic systemic relationships of race in the built environment. And so at times for me, it meant speaking up when I'm the only Black person in the room. And sometimes that can be scary, but that is I am Black. And I remember the voices of those who came before me, and the ones who don't have a strong voice, right? So it's not a mistake that, Black and Latino, Native American communities have some of the worst accesses to supermarkets and grocery stores. It's not a mistake that the zoning and housing and transportation, land use, you name it, planning practices, policy, public policy issues exist today because of all that has happened in the past, right? How we use space, how that space is then policed, right? These are all things I remember, you know, my five-year-old self seeing the homeless population, you know, just being terrified at the moment. But then I get to my 30s and I'm like, wow, this is really an issue. And wow, this is predominantly a minority issue. Oh, wow, these are vulnerable populations. So it's all connected. And I every room that I go into, conference room, boardroom, whoever it is, just being able to know that those experiences allow me to have confidence and speak truth to power.
Great, thank you. I totally identify with being a Southeast, grew up in Southeast myself. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Southeast.
Southeast.
Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
I sure can.
Okay.
How's your experience being Black impacted your work in the built environment, community development space?
So I think as I said already, development is not like, well, I take that back. On the government level of things, like Department of Housing divisions in DC, Maryland, and even Virginia, you see a lot more people that look like me that are Black. When it comes to for-profit developers, not so much. Not too many of us, but it is getting better. I was blessed. I was born in DC, but raised in PG. I'm sorry, Prince George's. I got to be better about that. Prince George's County, product of Prince George's County Public Schools. My parents were, blue collar, hardworking people. And I went to Morgan State, and during my time at Morgan, I became a member of Zeta Phi Beta sorority. I'm huge on community service and giving back to the community. That's just, it wakes me up every day. So I knew whatever I did, I had to have community involved. And at Morgan, they actually had a affordable housing class. And that's kind of where my first exposure to real estate and affordable housing began. And during that class, I realized how much I really wanted to do something like this for the rest of my life. I just knew that was it. Kind of like what O'Shea was saying, like you start to think about a lot of the things growing up that you were kind of scared of. Like I remember being on the Metro, and you would get to Georgia Avenue Petworth, you look around like, oh boy, this is, back in the day, that was not a stop on the Metro. You were just those from around here, no. But now it's completely different. But as a kid, you're just, my dad will say, don't smile, like have a serious face. You're in DC, like just, these things as a kid you don't think about. Then when you get older and you start to realize, wow, even at Morgan, like you really start to tap into the racial injustices like that are going on all around you. And sadly, in affordable housing, there's such a high need for it. And sadly, most of the affordable housing communities are in poverty-stricken areas. That is unfortunate. And I know the planner at O'Shea is like, yeah, redlining is real. And it's like white folks have had almost, a decade's advance over us. And it just makes me think about quality of life. Yeah, like I'm not going to go into like specific examples, but right now my passion is affordable housing, and the residents that I see in the communities that I serve, they deserve quality housing just like folks that make, $100,000 a year living in Montgomery County, and, folks that are the cleaning people that make $30,000 a year deserve the same level of housing. And being Black in this field has made me more aware to that. Because usually for developers, it's all about getting higher rents, selling at the highest level. And as working for a nonprofit, we take a step back. We're mission driven. Like we want to make sure that folks have some place to stay. We're long-term owners. We don't just, build and walk away. We make sure that our residents can, afford to stay there. They have programs and after school activities for their kids, because if they have a safe and quality place to stay, housing is one less thing they have to worry about. They can go and, worry about jobs, worry about school, worry about all the other life things that happen to us, and not have to worry about a huge hole in their roof because they can't afford to fix it. I just think being Black in America and, doing what I do, it makes me a little more sensitive to these things when I do development. So.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
For me, great responses from both of the panelists. I think for me, in all honesty, having grown up partially in West Africa, and which is very critical, your formative years, and for me, it was between age 4.5 till I was 16, till I finished high school, and then I came over. It's easy to sort of fall into this sense of I don't want to use the word complacency, but sort of this false sense of security that you think that everybody is equal and everybody's treated equal. Because when I was growing up in Africa, everybody looked like you, right? Everybody looks like you. Everybody's contesting for the same grades in school. Everybody's contesting for the same jobs. There's no checkpoint that says you, because of this color of your skin, you belong in this category versus the other. So sort of coming to the United States, coming back, I should say. And I see this in my sibling, my brother, as well as my cousins, that there's this sense of, oh, I can compete with anybody. I'm not, this is your box that you want to put me in. I don't exist in that box. I'm gonna sort of exist in my own box on my own terms. However, the more and the longer I resided in the States, the more you start seeing sort of like these built-in, use the word legacy, sort of entrenchment of some of these policies that are affecting people's minority people. And in the beginning, when I finished my academic career, going into, sorry, there's a the joy of living in the city, right? There's a siren behind me, I apologize. Getting into the professional field, I still was sort of existing, looking at the profession through those lenses, not really maybe looking deep enough or taking off the rose tinted sunglasses. But and I was lucky enough with the projects that I was working on. I think I kind of had to tease that out of those projects myself. Those projects were not necessarily in the US. They were sort of in other parts of the globe. And I'll use a couple as an example, one in the US, in Baltimore, and then the other one in the Middle East. I remember I was working on this project. It was a mosque in Saudi Arabia, and it's supposed to be for this think tank that's looking at the futures of energy, and they're building this community that has housing and schools, and of course, being Saudi Arabia, being in the Middle East, the mosque is a very important aspect of it, and this was sort of like the crown jewel of the project. And I remember when I was working on it with my boss and was sort of designing it and stuff, I drew a quick sketch of what I thought the interior of the mosque could look like. And I drew people worshiping, people sort of like bowing down and worshiping. And my boss didn't get a chance to look at it right before presentation. It was almost like the last minute he saw it. And he was like, okay, we got to take that off. And I was like, why? It's a great sketch. Well, why? Well, what do you mean? He was like, well, we have to be culturally sensitive to, we're an American firm. We're doing a project in Saudi Arabia. We have to sort of, the onus is on us to investigate where we're building to make sure we're doing right by the people that we're building for. And I was like, okay, I hear that, but what do you mean though? He's like, in your sketch, you're showing people that are bowing down and you're showing their feet. You should, because the sketch was like from behind. And in that part of the world, that's like an abomination. Like that would get you in trouble. And it dawned on me that I'm not just designing a building for people. I'm actually designing a place that has imperatives, cultural and then anthropological imperatives, which you can then overlay when you look at the US, the sort of racial issues that we're dealing with. And it kind of made me make a switch at that moment in terms of how I see architecture. We're not just doing buildings that look fantastic, that wins award. These are actually buildings and places that we're creating that affect people from cradle to grave. So why not do your due diligence and make sure that you're doing the project and make sure that it serves the people appropriately. And so I started honing how I saw architecture that is not just about shiny glazed buildings that you might see on a magazine, that you start thinking of the human condition, the human dimension that's part of this. So when you sort of look at how it translates to racial inequalities in the US, I'll use another example, maybe two projects as an example. One of them being a project I did at Morgan State when I was working at HRK. It's the Behavioral and Social Sciences building, which is aptly called the Jenkins Hall at Morgan State. And I remember when we were working on that, working with Morgan State, they actually have such a fantastic vision for the role of the campus in the community, how it can sort of help. It's not just some academic HBCU that sits in the community that awards degrees. They're actually looking at the impact of the institution on the community and how they can help. So they have this initiative called the Morgan Community Mile. Jessica, I'm sure you've heard about it, where
Yep.
the president, President Wilson, I think was his name,
Yeah, Wilson.
Created all these initiatives in terms of how the university can help uplift all these minority neighborhoods that surrounds it, how they can sort of work in a synergistic way. And we kind of made that our mantra when we were looking at that building. It's almost like this motto that we adopted, do no harm, right? Where the building, we're designing it to the program that Morgan wants, with all the different College of Liberal Arts that's gonna inhabit this building. But then we go, okay, we've designed the envelope, we've designed the container. How is this building elevating the community? How are we designing this? And making sure that it's entrenched, making sure that the design options that we come up with is not something that they can go, oh yeah, this costs too much, let's take it off the table, and therefore it loses its impact. So we went through looking at the history of the place. Surprisingly, we found out through our investigation that the first sit-in, restaurant or dining sit-in occurred right on the site off of Hillen Road there with some students that were protesting against racial inequalities. So it became a challenge. How do we sort of fold that history, that legacy into this new project that we're doing? And we went, I don't have a slide here to sort of talk about those initiatives, but those were pointed approaches that we took. And then we even went further and said, which I actually think, I'm not going to give the credit to the firm I was working for. I actually give the credit to Morgan State, where they wrote it in the contract whenever they're doing a new building with an architecture firm to lift the boat or to lift the tide. It's written in the contract that you have to have one of the students, be it a student in architecture, urban planning, construction management, real estate, that will be involved with that project. So they'll be getting experience, but also getting credit for it. So throughout the life of the Jenkins Halls I was working on, whenever we go to the trailer, there's always this student or two that's sitting there, that's learning how we're doing the building and getting credit for it. And in a sense, it's almost like by extension, this way of sort of helping to lift the community. And I really, really treasured that. I treasured those relationships because it's not like some, Fortune 500 company that's designing this building, coming in and just doing the building, getting the accolades, and then moving on to the next project. They're actually doing these, as small as they may seem, these little measures that's contributing to lifting the community that they're serving. And I really have made that my mantra in terms of how I approach my work.
Great. Thank you. We already have questions coming in, which is really exciting. But so I just want to get through I have like 2.5 questions left. So we're going to try to get to those really quick, and then we can get to some of the questions that are coming in the chat box. But so my next question is, well, as we look back or look forward, I guess, on the events of the past year with the racial reckoning, we also have how coronavirus is disproportionately impacting our black communities and brown communities. How can the built environment support racial social justice? Olashay. I'll start with Jessica first. Jessica.
We can't keep going the way we've been going. Yeah, we have to change. So it's funny. I've been thinking a lot about this. I think a lot of people, not just Black people, but I think a lot of people have been thinking over the last almost 12 months now. We've had racial injustices for decades, and all of a sudden, it all came to a front when George Floyd was murdered, and I'm gonna say murdered. And he wasn't the last. Clearly, we've had incidents since then, either being shot, not killed, or shot and paralyzed. But it all came to a float with him, and part of me wonders, you had Ferguson. We had, in Baltimore, we had Freddie Gray. This was all before George Floyd, but something happened over the summer. And I don't know I think a lot of it could be from the pandemic, like folks are at home, nothing really to distract you from external, like, oh, I got to go hang out with my girlfriends. I'm going to travel. I'm going to my class. You're seeing this on TV. You're seeing this unfold. And everybody and their grandma put out these Black Lives Matter statements. Now, all of a sudden, people are hiring diversity, equity, and inclusion people. And, and now it's like, oh, yeah, it's fixed. We can move on. It's like, oh, yeah, we did our job. Check the box. But that's just starting, the talks have started. I know at my company, we had a talk. We had a couple of talks this past summer about racial injustice and what this looks like. And to be honest, some of my white colleagues, they admitted that they were uncomfortable, and we responded, good. It's time to be uncomfortable, because in order to move forward in development and planning and community development, we have to address the past, and we have to address these issues, because if we don't address and learn from our past, we're never gonna do anything right in the future. So
great, thanks.
Yeah, I can go next. So your question was about what can we do in light of everything that has happened in the last year.
Right.
So I think one of the first things that I realized, being grateful that of the position that I'm in, that I actually have a voice, right? And I have a voice that can reach the administrator. I'm just giving my example of the Maryland Transit Administration, even to the Maryland Secretary of Transportation. And that because of that, it is on me to then speak up and say something, right? So having conversations, not just about equity, but even within the Office of Planning, we decided to do equity training and really have those uncomfortable conversations that Jessica is talking about. But more specifically in our work, it caused us to ask ourselves, are we, being compliant and that's it? Or are we, actually moving the needle in some of the projects that we're working on? And so there was this movement from going beyond compliance to actual bold statements and making them very public to the community. So that's something, we're developing right now. Other things that come to mind are, how we are redefining the data that we have available, right? It's not just enough. For example, you know, a lot of us, we rely on census data, which is great. But you know, there are other avenues to understanding more in depth how the underserved populations are affected. So for example, not just looking at income, but, you know, looking at like the accumulation of wealth over time. So really thinking about when we make, you know, we manage roughly a $3 billion 6-year capital program. And so when you're thinking about how to prioritize funding, you know, we need to be thinking through an equity lens on how we prioritize that funding. So making decisions like that, I would say, is important. Another thing that I found helpful within this last year, you know, everyone wanted to have the conversation. Let's talk about it. You know, some of my white colleague friends and professional friends were like, can I talk to you about this? Like, I don't know if I can say it to other people, but I want to, you know, just, can I say this? And I think creating that safe space for people to speak freely and to be transparent and open is something that we all should be doing as professionals, you know, as planners, architects, developers. Like, we serve all people, right? And so that includes our non-minority community who, you know, at times we just need to have that conversation, educate. You know, one thing I tell them is talk to your friends, talk to your family members. I know some, you know, there was one individual who I talked to, she had a long conversation with her mom who around the 60s, you know, during the segregation of schools, her mom didn't, like, she knew about it, but she never thought of it, and also didn't connect the issues with the achievement gap that that happens today with, you know, the segregation that existed in the 60s. So she was, you know, having this conversation and educating her mom, right? So these are all opportunities that we all can start doing. Our cousins, you know, that one uncle that says that off comment that people kind of just frown at, right? Like, those are opportunities to have that conversation. And then just to remember that we all have shared values, right? Love, respect, safety, empathy, family. Like, these are things that unite us. And I think we just have to continue to remember that in our individual professions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you make a very interesting point. We serve all people, which I actually, it's a great statement. One thing that I have done with, and this sort of dovetails into this sort of racial inequity in the built environment that we're talking about. You know, with some younger students that I've worked with, you know, students in high school, I remember when I first started working with underserved schools and introducing architecture to them when I was at RTKL, they would come to the office and kind of show them what we're doing. And they're mostly, you know, 99% African-American students. And sort of like the sense that I get from them of not belonging, why are we here? Even at that age, which is very, to me, is disturbing. I'm sort of like, let's just have a great time and, you know, do what you do, right? Like this is you, just do it. And I knew that it's something that I had to sort of, in a forceful way, make them recognize, first of all, how important they are, you know, as unique individuals. But also the notion of architecture. I remember the second week that they came over, I took them all in our office in Baltimore, was in the harbor. I took them to the window, all the students, and I lined them up by the window. And this sort of dovetails into Shay's point about we serve all people. I asked them to sort of cast their gaze across the horizon and describe what they saw. And, you know, some students like, oh, we see boats, we see water, we see people. And this student see, oh, I see buildings everywhere. And I go, yep, that's it. Like, in the human experience, and I don't think us all, architects, planners, real estate developers, we either don't get enough credit, or we don't give ourselves enough credit that everything that sort of defines humanity is things that we produce, the infrastructure that you see, the buildings where we live our lives, where we love and feed our children and grow up and die in. Everything is done by us designers, right? Us architects and planners. And the fact that we can influence it enough to sort of maybe fix some of these societal ills is very potent. And I think, you know, with the unfortunate, untimely death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, you know, I'm glad that it sort of forced it into the sort of the discourse that there are inequities in society that we've glossed over time and time again. But it's time that we start to sort of, you know, there's a time of reckoning that we start fixing these things. And so how does that sort of find itself in architecture? And I think in architecture, you know, like I was saying, I think the pipeline, you would hear it on and off, this idea of the pipeline of sort of like from cradle to grave, architects that are making these built environment that's shaping our lives, right? That are working in firms and sitting on boards. It's very important that they are aware of these inequities, and not just aware of it, they're willing to do something about it. And I think it starts from way in the beginning when they're in academia, before they even enter the schools of architecture, you know, like the young students that I was talking about, just pointing out the importance of the built environment and the role that we play in it. You know, when you can tap, be it Black or white, Chinese, you know, whatever race you're talking about, once you sort of make them recognize the importance of every single person that's part of the equation, when they get to schools, they'll demand for a curriculum that shows that, right? Be it LGBTQ, you know, racial issues. And then when they get to the workplace, they'll ask for it. And we can kind of see that with the millennials that are sort of growing up now, which are not like our grandparents. They're asking these frank questions and going, you know, why are things this way? So I think that idea of the pipeline, catching them very early, and at Maryland, at the University of Maryland, as part of what we're doing this past semester, especially with the George Floyd occurrence, is actually looking at our pedagogy and going, are we being inclusive enough? Are we actually representing the voices of everybody, as opposed to like a certain sect that historically has been the way we've done business? Obviously, everybody else around the globe have contributed to, you know, what we have now. So the curriculum is addressing that in a systematic way, which I think is very encouraging, because those students that are taking those classes, they're going to be the future board members, and they're going to be the people that are hiring people. Now, once you plant that seed in them of this inclusivity seed, hopefully, that's the hope, hopefully, right? That they can sort of make the future brighter and better for us all. Because like I was saying to people, Black people are not going anywhere. We're here on this planet, just like white people and Mexican people and Chinese people. We're all here. There's no planet B. So the earlier we figure it out, that we figure how to live together, and so we can all get the joys and benefits out of it, the better, because we're just wasting time because these things keep occurring. So I'm making my mantra to sort of, you know, even on the board of the American Institute of Architects DC chapter that I sit on, I try to sort of voice those idea of making sure that, you know, there's representation, not just at the workplace, at the board level, but also in academia, you know, in teaching faculties that are teaching, the percentage of students that they're recruiting, you know, to sort of create this equitable, you know, data set that follows us into the future. So that's how I see me contributing to this racial issue that we're talking about.
Great, thank you. So I have my last question before I give it over to the audience. So if you, audience folks, participants, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, you know, start thinking about them. And so my last question for you all is this, you know, it sort of piggybacks on what Mckay was just talking about. You know, we're not going anywhere from the Great Migration to present day. With gentrification happening in many cities, Black communities our communities seem to be ever changing. And as we look into the future, maybe 5-10 years out, what's the outlook? What trends do you see? Do you see another Great Migration, which we are seeing some of the data in that, sort of a repatriation to the South? You know, what do you all see? as we look into the future for us?
I can jump in.
Okay.
Sorry. So it's a great topic, and I think the trend that you're talking about, which as a subsect has race within it, obviously is this issue of climate change that it's on everybody's tongue. Everybody talks about it, but I don't think we're taking it seriously enough because the impact hasn't been completely felt yet. We're seeing it in these anomalous blips of things that are happening, like Texas and all the stuff that happened this past week. But it has such a potential for awfulness for the globe, and that sort of would trickle down to race. We've always, you always look at Black communities; they've always gotten the short end of the stick. Once climate change is sort of folded onto that, the hope is that it's not actually exacerbated the condition, the sort of Black experience, right? So I applaud all these people that are sort of looking at these sort of almost like foreshadowing and thinking ahead and saying, okay, climate's going to be an issue because there's going to be food inequities that's going to affect us all because of climate change, and people are going to be displaced across the globe. And, all those neighborhoods, and we see that in DC kind of folds into gentrification. The neighborhood, there's actually, there was this, forgive me, she's a Nigerian author, young author, and she wrote this science fiction book. And I remember listening to it on NPR, and I thought, what a brilliant idea, where she was talking about the fact that global change, climate change has affected the world so much in the future that these undesirable places, like, for example, the Sahara Desert in Africa, now became like prime real estate. And of course, it became the place that now people are fighting for. But guess who's living there? It's sort of like right now, it's sort of like the impoverished and sort of like the Black and brown people that are living there. So you can kind of see, if climate change becomes a major thing, how people that currently have money and power are going to use the same resources. I know somebody was asking a question about Nimbyism and whatnot, and maybe we'll get into that in a bit. It's just going to put so much further strain on these communities of color. And so I think the earlier we can sort of identify these things sort of happening in the distance, and we can sort of attack them and tackle them, the better off we'll all be, but especially minority communities, because I think it's coming.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I think about, I joined, I think it was an APTA conference last year, and they were talking about trends in transportation and all of the things that we should expect to see. And I remember I remember the speaker talking about all of these social disruptions that are happening right now as a result of technological advancements. Some of them being how we date, right? How we shop, how we get food, how we, like, everything. And then, look at what we're doing now. We now have the opportunity to have conversations across the country, across the world. Mm-hmm. I was just at another conference last weekend, and there were people from Canada and South Africa. Like, we have the technology is moving and it's changing. But what Mckay said is so true, right? Like, in that movement, there are some populations, vulnerable populations, that are being left out. I think about autonomous vehicles, right? And the number of union operators and jobs that could be lost if we only care about the technology and we forget about the homes and the jobs and the families that rely on those jobs, right? So I think we're going to see that happening. I also think, like I mentioned before, you're going to see the reliance on how we use the data to make and justify our decisions. And that comes from the data with climate change to the data, like I said earlier, about how we make funding decisions on what to prioritize. We will never, ever have enough money to solve every issue at the same time. And so we're always going to have to prioritize, but how do we make sure that we prioritize equitably and include, those vulnerable populations? So I do see that trend of relying on data, justifying that, increasing as well.
And I don't have too much more to add because these two covered it, but I do want to just like jump on the whole climate change soapbox because we've been shouting from the rooftops forever about climate change, right? And it's like, oh, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. It's here, and Texas was the latest thing. And I mean, if you're on social media, you can see the pictures. Oh, one side of the town is really dark. Oh, that's where all the Black and brown people live. This side is lit up, this is where the white people live. It's crazy because this is happening before our very eyes. Look at what happened in Puerto Rico with the hurricane a couple of years ago. I mean, it's happening everywhere. Resiliency in the built environment is something that I know Enterprise has, they put together like housing tool indicators around resiliency. Like, is your building prepared for these type of events? And they were working with DC Department of Energy to look at affordable housing buildings to see like how they rank, because we had Superstorm Sandy. I mean, it's happening so much more now. So we need more money. I'm the developer in the room, but we need more money to do this. But policy, who you guys put in office, like all these things matter because it's only going to get worse. And if you don't have people that are representing vulnerable populations and at the table, they'll just continue to get left behind.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Jessica. And if I may add to the point that Oluseyi was making, because I was making notes when you asked the question, just things to touch on. You mentioned something that I think is actually quite apt, which is technology, right? And I think in minority communities, I wish there's considerable efforts in terms of pushing technology and teaching people about technology, STEM and all these programs, trying to push minority students into that. It's very critical because we talked about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and all these stuff that happened. In my experience, as I've been back in the United States, there's always been all these injustices happening, right? People of, minority people complain about them, and, the other side of the coin, they just kind of go, okay, well, you must have been a criminal, if you were being killed by, so-and-so. But the advent of technology, the cell phone, is something that actually was a game changer, that sort of blew everything into what now we're talking about. We talked about this sort of like protest that happened with George Floyd. If the camera wasn't there, the person that's standing there on the sidewalk that took a little bit of a almost like a YouTube moment and posted it, and now we all see it, then we wouldn't have what we're having, because all these inequities have been happening historically since Jim Crow, even before that. That wasn't on everybody's across the globe. It wasn't on the tip of the tongue of everybody. So I think technology, especially when it comes into this sort of next generation of technology, which goes into data sourcing and data collecting, coding, is something that I would love to see more minorities getting involved in. Now, when I say minorities, I mean minorities in the United States. My brother actually works for Microsoft globally right now, and he travels all over the globe, and he's working on initiatives in Africa, in Ghana, in Nigeria, where they opened their own version of Silicon Valley. And you get all these students that are bringing different perspectives to coding, trying to be part of the discourse, because they understand that this is the future. Like we're moving towards a data-driven society. Somebody mentioned AI and like all this stuff. And I think, being able to sort of encourage minority communities in this country to sort of get into that, and forcing these companies like Microsoft and Tesla and all these companies to invest in communities, in these minority communities, to sort of help bring them up. Because I think technology, at the end of the day, is the equalizer across the board. If I'm equipped with technology and there's another white counterpart next to me that has the same amount of technology, I can do what you do. literally. I can, so I think investing in that, in our youths, especially when it comes to technology in the minority community, is something that I really, really, really support. And I wish we can just knock out of the park. Sorry.
Great. All right. So now we're going to transition into audience questions. And so I thought I'm trying to get as many questions as I can in. So if we can do maybe like a rapid fire section, don't feel compelled to answer everyone to answer these questions, but so we can get as many as we can in. So the first question comes from an alum, Tom Leonard. Do you feel like you're, yeah, Shay, yeah, Tom. Do you feel like your truth and experience is respected in the workplace? And what more can we do to foster diverse leadership?
The second part of that question is key. I think about this a lot. How do you bring people up to, C-suite? Because I actually, I wrote it down. BizNow, they're like a real estate group in the DMV area. They're in other parts of the country too, but they actually came out with an article this week. These developers have built up America. Their executives are 93% white. It is a fantastic article. If you get a chance to read it, it came out earlier this week. And it was interesting because in that article, someone mentioned like, if you're Black in development, you have to be so proactive and know people who know people who know people just to get to a C-suite or close to a C-suite. It takes probably close to, 20 or 30 years just to do that. Whereas some of our white colleagues, their dad had the business. So now they're, kind of in the, they're kind of close to the top now anyway, or their dad's retiring. So now they are there. They work hard too, don't get me wrong, but it is about who you know. And all about who you know. So I think the onus is on us as now, I mean, we're older. It's crazy. I feel like I used to be the kid in the room. Now I'm the folks on the panel. And it's my job, it's our job to really, mentor folks and expose them. Like Mckay was saying, having the students line up and what do you see? Like making an impact on kids and students in high school and in college, that these are possible and you can make a difference. I think the onus is on us to help foster that so that we can raise these folks into leadership roles. Because I think that's critical. I just wanted to answer that part of the question.
Great.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly, rapid fire, right? Do you feel like your truth and experience is respected in the workplace? Not all the time, no, especially when you are the only Black woman, right? But what I have determined, in my life is I'm going to let my experience speak for itself, right? I'm going to always remember, like I said earlier, that I'm serving all people. I'm not serving the board members that are right next to me. I'm serving the communities that I grew up in, right? Another thing that I think is important, so the Maryland Transit Administration, we just released a Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan for the Central Maryland area. And what we learned in that process, it's funny because I am this Black professional working on this plan with my colleagues, but then we realized there wasn't enough of equity in there. And we got called out on it from members of the public and from stakeholders. And it dawned on me like, oh, okay, I guess we do need to do more. And I guess we do need to be more explicit, specifically about leadership, right? So when you look at leadership at MTA, what does that look like? And I'm not talking about from when you look at everybody, including the operators. I'm talking about when you look at executive leadership, how is that broken out? And how can we then point the finger at ourselves and say, wait, we have work to do. And I'm grateful that, our administrator, Kevin Quinn, he has a planner brain. He is a certified planner. So he gets it, right? So like when we talk to him about these things, he understands that. And so in a nutshell, like, I think what we can do to diversify leadership is to recognize it. When you go into that meeting and you see that there's only one Black student, or there's only one Asian woman, or there is, just that one minority, have that in the back of your mind about what can I do to help that. And the last thing I'll say is I'm a part of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, COMTO. And what we are doing, we're working with Morgan State University students to have a direct pathway into, once you graduate, these are the opportunities that you have in all of these different firms or public sector agencies. And I think we have to make that connection very clear, right? From undergrad to if you go to grad school, right into the workforce, people are looking for diverse, qualified candidates. And I will be honest, because I want to be honest, you guys, sometimes it's hard to find. And we have to do the work to educate. We have to do the work to refine skills where we can, to really, encourage additional minority students to apply who are qualified.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to Sean's question about Nimbyism and equitable communities. Who wants to? Mckay, did you wanted to take back? You brought it. You referenced it earlier.
Yeah, I think maybe this might be a question aptly answered by Jessica and Shay. Not to put you guys on the spot, because you with your scope of work, you're looking at much more broader, impactful sort of events, right, as opposed to like a building.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys are, if you think that's up your alley.
Yeah. So Nimbyism is still real.
Very real.
Can we say what that means for people who don't?
Oh, yes, not in my backyard.
Yep.
So Nimbyism, we hear it a lot. It's still real. Case in point, there's a project we were working on, and it took years to finish. It was in Richmond, Virginia, and we were working with the housing authority. It was public housing. We were relocating residents into the Jackson Ward neighborhood, which was, it used to be Black Wall Street. Now it's very, it's very different now. It's not a lot of Black people there anymore. And we were building this, we were, proposing this building, and there was this lodge, American Lodge kind of group. And they were like, no, like this, we don't want this here. No. It took a while. I think it delayed the project almost a year because we had to convince, and we kind of waited for certain folks to exit certain positions and try it again. And we finally were able to move forward, but it is still a thing. One of the ways that I don't want to say, combat. One of the ways we combat Nimbyism is to be like a community stakeholder. So we go to the night meetings. We don't just come in as a developer and say, this is what we're going to do. We actually try to become part of the community. Like, we come to these night meetings, we listen, we take notes, we're here, we're invested. That does help when it comes to Nimbyism as far as development goes.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. When I was working with MTA myself in the same department as Olashay before she got there, we were installing bus shelters across the city of Baltimore. And I never thought a bus shelter was so divisive until I started working on installing them. And people were like, I don't want that here. I don't want the bus,
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting trying to promote equity for people differently abled, but people were very against it. What were you going to say, Shay?
Yeah, really quick point. Just not underestimating the power of the people.
Yeah.
If there's one thing we've learned last year is the organizing power of people has power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're thinking about, my undergrad years, my grad years. There were two books that I will never forget. The first one is I've Got the Light of Freedom. And the second is Streets of Hope. So I've Got the Light of Freedom was about the 1960s. and how the young people, were powerful, and how they organized. You think of Martin Luther King. He was young, but he was in his 30s. But there were actually people younger, in their teens, who actually were a lot of that change. So I think using the organizing power of young people, educating the community. So Streets of Hope was about the Dudley Street Initiative in Boston. And that one was interesting because it was about civic engagement, but they actually took the power back and said, we now educated ourselves on what eminent domain is, and we're going to buy our own land and own it. And so I think just understanding that, okay, there are political powers at play. You have to educate officials. You have to organize, you have to look at the standards and the codes and the policies and understand, what is this person, this NIMBY person saying? What is the law saying about that? What is the code saying? Who owns what? What is the right of way? Who is the community that it's serving? You're asking all of these questions, and then trying to have open and honest conversations to the best of your ability with this group of people who may not understand the importance of the project, may not understand, they're just seeing it from one perspective, like the bus shelters that Matt talked about, right? Like, oh, we don't want certain people on these bus shelters, the homeless population. But then maybe there's a way to bring a broader conversation about the need and the benefits of this particular project. You're not going to win them all, but you can at least try to educate and talk to the officials who actually make the decision.
Yeah, and I think Nimbyism, can often be a double-edged sword, right? There seems to be a negative connotation to Nimbyism because you see them as people that are blocking the path of progress, but it can be actually effective when you look at it in certain ways. When it comes to gentrification, right? When people are sort of like coming over that are sort of decimating an original neighborhood, to put a Whole Foods, what was it? Whole Paycheck, somebody said earlier. To sort of like install like a Whole Foods like in a neighborhood that people that might have been there historically could see that this could start leading to the erosion of sort of like the people that have been there originally. You take U Street for DC. So Jessica, you were mentioning Petworth, and I was laughing earlier because in the late 80s, early 90s, when I first came back to DC, my parents were living near Cardozo, and I used to work. I used to work at it used to be called People's Drugs, downtown.
People's,
on Pennsylvania Avenue. And when we close the store at midnight, I have to take a bus back uptown. And my mom would have to like leave the house with my cousins in a robe to come stay at the bus stop and wait for me to get off the bus. Because they know that it's Jewish. It wasn't the neighborhood that we now see, that Starbucks and strollers and little puppies and stuff. But you wonder if the Black community that lived around Howard Street at that point, recognizing this sort of impending sort of gentrification that might happen and push them out, for tax reasons or otherwise, could have maybe taken a stance and say, we want to preserve the legacy and the history that is here, as compared to like now when you go to U Street and there's almost no semblance of the historical aspect of Washington, D.C. that was entrenched from the 50s up to the 80s, which has sort of been eroded. So my point being that it can be a double sword or a double-sided thing to consider. The point which ties to what Oluseyi was saying, is education, right? If there is a cause that you're bringing to the table that some people the Nimbyism might be revolting against, just as Jessica was saying, how do you become a stakeholder in the neighborhood so that you're fighting their fight as well? It's not just like this alien grafting that comes in and sort of disperses everybody and it becomes a new thing. It actually takes into account the part of their shoe that hurts, and it takes it into account and respects it and treasures it and helps it grow, which to me, I think that's sort of like how you deal with Nimbyism. Sometimes it's not, I don't think it's always necessarily always bad. And that might be controversial. Very.
But that's great. You say it like you mean it. That's why this is a great panel. So let's try to get, these such great questions that are not like short answers, unfortunately, but we'll try to keep them short so we can, well, it's just a big one. Is there a plan for homeless families in the built environment? Who wants to take that on the show? Oh, wow. Ugh.
I think the architect should take this one.
Sure. And yes, there is, there should be accommodation for people in our society that are not, that don't have shelter, because that's sort of like one of these fundamental rights that I think every human deserves. And actually the onus is on society, on us all that can provide, to ensure that our brothers and sisters in society are well taken care of. Because we're only as strong as our weakest link. You've heard this on and on. And I think in architecture, especially, I remember last semester we were working on a project for the students at University of Maryland for the studio projects, and it's supposed to be a community center. But when we were looking at the pedagogy and the curriculum and the project brief at least, the faculty decided, no, we've been talking about some of these seismic societal issues of racial inequalities and, people not having enough that are living on the street. How can we fold this into the program so students are already thinking about this as they solve some of these design issues? So these community centers, it's a library, these community libraries that we ask the students to design, we actually ask them to create a theme for it, be it a theme that looks at the building through the lens of racial inequality or issue of LGBTQ issues, or homelessness. And we were all very surprised and actually very encouraged to see the thought level that the students brought to the table in terms of solving these issues, right? We're designing a library. We actually had somebody from, I forgot the name of the firm, that's designing the Martin Luther King Library, is refurbishing it. And one of the questions that we asked as a class is, how does this cater to homeless people? Because homeless people see libraries as resources that they can't live without. That's how they access their internet. That's how they access their email. That's sometimes how actually they get a meal, in a day. They might line up, the library might have a soup kitchen and stuff. So getting the students to think of how to solve spatial problems that has a program attached to it, but that is inclusive. When we say inclusive, we're not just talking race, we're not just talking sexual orientation, but we're also talking about other members of the society, like the homeless people. How do you design a park that isn't hostile to a homeless environment? You see it all around where people put benches and they put those spikes on it so the homeless people don't lie on it. Well, you can be much more creative than that, right? To design, and that's one thing we've been trying to get the students to think about, so that when they do become professionals, it just comes with ease, right? In terms of them designing these buildings that takes into account some of these issues. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. We have another question in that same vein about, was a question about
disabilities.
Inclusive architecture when it comes to disabilities. Abledness. It brings me thinking back to my bus shelter time at MTA, thinking about how to access them in the grade. And so if someone's in a wheelchair, things like that. So we want to speak to that about.
Yeah, quick story, which, I don't want to equate it to individuals with disabilities, but I think it's a reminder. I remember when I had my first child, and I think we were in the airport and I had a stroller. And we were trying to get through the airport and I was like, oh crap, I can't go down the escalator. And it took us forever to find an elevator. And it in that moment, it dawned on me like, wow, I wonder what people go through who are in wheelchairs and how they get around and how they access certain things throughout a particular space. But I think the equity conversation, we have to be careful about the equity conversation only being racial equity, right? The equity conversation is also very much a part of the individuals with disabilities, and we need to talk about it, right? And so I'm sure she's not here, but Jamie Mckay, who is a professional at MDOT has really helped us to see the perspective of these people who, have to get on a bus blind, right? Who have to walk through the busy streets of Baltimore, and how we think about, signage, how we think about the little things that we can do here and there, whether it's on the bus, whether it's walking down the street, whether it's in a particular building, how we can, be more inclusive and make those spaces appropriate for them. And someone just said in the chat, especially Black people with disabilities, that's a whole nother discussion, right? Because then you're talking about the resources that they have to even be able to move throughout the city or move throughout a particular area. Just wanted to piggyback off of the comment before in talking about homelessness and talking about accessibility, that planning is everything. And I think sometimes it being everything, we lose the importance of each of these different components, but it really is everything. And I think we have to work with the Department of Disabilities. We have to work with social services to really, we can't be the built environment. Architects are not planners, and don't be offended by this, media. You are not the solution to every problem, right? And neither am I as a planner. Right, we are not the solution to everything. So what we really need to focus on is increasing and enhancing partnerships with these organizations and departments.
Great. All right. So we have a fellow Laurel High School. So for those that don't know, Olashay and Jessica went to the same high school in Prince George's County, Laurel. And so Laura Stieg, I assume you guys know Laura. You ladies know.
She graduated with us.
All right. You asked a great question.
Small world.
We've taken over.
Her question is, why is there such a disconnect between the rich diversity in Prince George's County and the lack thereof of UMD MAPP+D when we are located in Prince George's? How do we do better at MAPP at our School of Architecture? Do we need to go back to Laurel High School to recruit? Yes. I sit on the review committee for the University of Maryland as for admission for freshmen. And it's always great to have alumni go back and do recruiting in conjunction with the admissions office to recruit students into especially architecture. And one of the great things that's going on right now in the school, it's COVID delayed it, but we are adding a undergraduate degree in real estate development. Yeah, right? Isn't that exciting? So
shout out to Maria De Marshall, who's on here.
For those that are familiar with us, our school only has one undergraduate degree, and that's architecture, but we have 4 graduate degrees: architecture, planning, preservation, and real estate development. And we have 1 PhD program. So this is really exciting for our school, because I often say when I'm in meetings across the university that we are one of the smallest schools on campus, but have the largest impact. So what do you all think about Laura? I said my piece about Laura's question.
Oh, no, I agree. So this was years ago, but I actually went to Career Day, at Laurel. And I talked at that time, I was doing green building consulting, but I was getting students interested. Like, can you imagine, a green roof on the new annex? I don't know if they call it the annex anymore, but can you imagine a green roof on the annex? And I actually was trying to get them interested in green building. And I think like Career Day and things like that could actually help open up students' eyes to what else they could be doing. Yeah.
You can invite them to campus. I think that's also one of the things that'd be cool. When we look at this space, is that, how many I don't want to say how many, I can't really ask a question like that, but I grew up in DC, maybe less than 5 miles from the campus. My first time really being on the campus was when I started working there. We didn't really go to College Park, and that's a whole nother show about why Black folks don't go to College Park, or just his history that, involving segregation and things like that. But I think that's something that also needs to be, that you look at, bringing people to campus and showing them how amazing it is. Great. And so I think this is the second to last, the last, look a little right, like people from UMD were not coming to, okay. And so I want to get to this last question. I skipped over it, but I want to come back to it. It's from, are there any areas where you feel the recent efforts and progress towards racial equity, despite their best intentions on the surface, still don't fully represent the Black community concerns? Any areas to that? I think of a number, but what do you all think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rapid fire. So I think that that's a good question, and I'm trying to be somewhat politically correct. I think a lot of folks checked the box and moved on. They put out their Black Lives Matter statement. They might have hired a diversity person, but that's about it. I think it kind of ties back to, how do you get a more diverse leadership, like in these different areas? Like, how do you get more people of color into a C-suite, the folks that are actually making decisions? I think we got a long way to go. I am happy that we're having the conversations now and that they haven't stopped. Like, but I do think that we have a long way to go, because even in this Biz Now article, it was funny how they were talking about all these like C-suite folks, and when they look around, all they see is white people. So they think it's okay. Like, they don't really see a problem because everybody looks the same. So they're doing development, not really thinking twice about it in some of the most urban cities in the country. But, if you don't know, how do you change, right? I think I think we've scratched a really, really hard surface, and we have a long way to go.
I think when we seeing the history of communities, right? I feel like a lot of the times, especially in DC, where we see these communities are changing, and I feel that some people still don't understand there's a deep history here that is often glossed over, right? And how they operate, how people tend to operate. People, I feel like the transplant term has become a pejorative in that way, because I would just call the people who are new to the community. And I feel like that's something where I wish there was like a webinar or something for people who move to a new community. Like, this is the history of the community. These are people who used to live here. This is what happened. Okay, now like mingle amongst the community of people.
Yeah, and it goes to this earlier question about Nimbyism, and I was trying to paint a counter argument to the idea that Nimbyism, you can actually make it work for you. For example, you guys remember reading in the news about a year ago where people in the U Street corridor were protesting people playing go-go music on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to make sure that that never happens again. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, this started here, right? That's the history of that area. And they went to court, and they told them that they can go ahead and do it. But these are people that are moving from different parts of the country that don't know the history of the place. And they come in, shiny new buildings, a Starbucks on the corner, and they think, oh, life goes on, right? But I think, people sort of raising their voice to be included in the conversation is very important. And it ties into the workplace as well. As Jessica was saying, raising your voice when something happens because like you were saying, like, collectively, we have a very short, almost like a goldfish memory when it comes to some of these things. Oh yeah, Sandra Bland got killed and Breonna Taylor got killed. Okay, what's next? COVID is happening. Let's put that on the back burner until the next seismic thing happens. But I think that thread in between those major blips, that's just the way the country is wired. The thread between the major blips is sort of where our work is mostly going to be. You know, that quiet moment in between when nobody wants to talk about it, that's actually when most hard work lies, where we talk about it. I remember an occurrence that happened in the firm that I was working in. And I was very, you know, I was an officer in the firm, you know, been there for years, thought I was doing well and all that stuff. And I remember just being at a water cooler one in the kitchenette area, getting, you know, water or something. And one of the partners walks up to me with a stack of paper, and he was in a hurry and just sort of like thrust it on me and said, "Can you make copies of those?" And I was like, "What? Excuse me?" And he's like, "Can you just go make copies?" And I'm like, "I don't work in the copy center." You know, like, and I kind of, and this guy is the nicest guy ever. Like, I knew that it was one of those cases of inherent bias where he wasn't actively trying to diminish me in any capacity by saying, "Go make me the," I'm like, I'm on the senior associate here, one of the lead designers in this firm. You should know me by now. You're asking me to go run copies. And he was mortified when he realized his mistake, and he was apologetic and, you know, all that stuff. And I know for a fact that he's a nice guy, that I don't think he was doing it from a racist place. However, the effect was already registered on me, you know, in terms of like his action. And also, how can he learn through his behavior and not repeat it? And that's where the communication comes in place, and go, okay, don't get too complacent in your laurels or in your setting. There are other people at the table as well that you should consider and listen to and encourage and elevate. And I think, again, in between those those seismic events that are happening, and it's going to happen in the future, we know it. This is the society we live in. In 5 weeks, we might hear there's another major, God forbid, we hope, right? But we know it's going to happen. But that in-between moment is where the most of our work lies, right? Like, in terms of just trying to change the way things are done.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
just one quick comment. I think you pretty much stole everything I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
Goodness. No, but the point, the question here says, despite their best intentions on the surface, it still doesn't fully represent. And I think that's the key here, that we can never normalize, you know, the dehumanization of how we, you know, deem individuals as inferior, the racially inferior, and all these other categories. We can never normalize it. We have to continue to speak truth to power. We also have to realize that, especially as me, as a Black educated professional, that my experiences are very different than other experiences. Like, even being, you know, serving the predominant, you know, Baltimore area, their lives are very different from my life. And so I have to recognize that and seek to educate myself on them and not generalize, right? Because that's something we got to be careful about too. But I think going back to the human nature of our work, right? Like, some people still don't have jobs. That's what they care about. They don't have a job. They lost their job in COVID. Their mother and father just died. You know, I was reading one story about a single mother of 8 and how she passed away because of COVID. And now the sister who also had kids took them on. You know, these are real stories. And I feel like the momentum behind George Floyd was great, but we're losing those individual stories. And at the kitchen table, you know, these people don't have enough food to eat, right? Like, these people, they care about their kids going to quality schools and not having to worry about lead poisoning, you know, similar to what happened at Flint, Michigan, that starts to change the genetic composition of their bodies. These are things that get lost in the, oh, there's a protest happening and the building is burning. There are other stories that are happening, and we have to make sure that we elevate those stories and not forget about it when it calms down and everyone just cares about the election of the president. Well, it's more than that, right? Like, there are critical issues happening, and we have to speak up.
Great, thank you so much. That was our last question. I just want to wrap it up by saying I want to thank all our panelists today who graciously gave their time, our alums, Olashay Olagbinley, Mide Akinsade, Jessica Jones. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to getting you all better in the future and hoping to see you in person soon in the summer. I also want to thank Erica Anderson on staff at our School of Architecture for being our Zoom wizard behind the scenes. Thank you, Erica. I also want to thank, this event could not have been done without the fabulous Sasheen Scott, okay, another Prince George's County hometown girl. She's alum of the program as well. She's been doing her thing. So I want to thank Sasheen for that, and also thank you all for joining us. We're going to send an email with more information about some things about our panelists. So if you perhaps wanted to get in touch with them, you could do that. So we're just so stay tuned for that. Oh, one last thing I wanted to say before we close, before people exit out. If you like this event, the school is offering other events as well. So Dr. Willow Lungamum, amazing professor on faculty, is hosting an event called Mapping Baltimore's Apartheid, the Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America. And that is the Ruskin Lecture that we have in our school. And the event for that is, bear with me, I'm just pulling it up, is March 2nd at 7 p.m. So next week, the Ruskin Lecture. If you are interested in Baltimore, race and politics and planning issues there, that is something that you should definitely check out. All righty then, enjoy your evening, enjoy your weekend, stay safe, and always go Terps.
Go Terps.
Bye everybody, good night.
Good night.